Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, June 10th, 2020. Yes, it's another show, and we're ready to, we're ready to commence regardless of what we know and what we're ready to bring to you. I know that Greg Dworkin has been preparing. I've been hearing in the last few minutes the reminders that I have left the sound on one of the computers that shouldn't have it, and all the stories popping up in his patented Raft O stories that we keep hidden in the background in Skype until we reveal them to you over the next hour. Plenty going on. Statues toppling everywhere. As a matter of fact, I can update you on one of the statue toppling stories from yesterday. I mentioned that in Belgium, the Congolese immigrants there had been protesting. I think I might have mentioned it Monday. Not sure. We'll have to track that down for you. It's important to know which day I mentioned it on. And that I couldn't remember exactly which King Leopold. I don't know how many King Leopolds there have been in Belgium, but it's King Leopold II. I'm not up on my Leopolds. Leopold, to me, of course, is a famous conductor from Bugs Bunny, not a King of Belgium. But I've been learning a bit about him, and I always had the sense that the Belgians had been particularly brutal and weird about their colonization of the Congo, and that they were latecomers to the colonization game, and so I guess they wanted to make up for lost ground, not only in land grabbing and looting, but in brutalizing local populations, and seeing a lot of tweets related to the story yesterday. One that clarified it was King Leopold II, and secondly clarifying just how brutal and oppressive the regime there had been, and the update, last we heard the statue had not come down, but apparently it has been brought down, and I'm not certain. We'll have to read up on who was responsible for bringing them down. A couple of these places, protesters are successful in getting local authorities to take them down in an orderly manner, and in other situations, they take the situation into their own hands and topple the statue. There is news in today that a Christopher Columbus statue is now found beheaded somewhere, probably tripped and fell on their way to the grocery store or something like that. A number of other interesting developments on that front. All positive as far as I can tell. Creates jobs in the statue industry, honestly, if you look at it that way. And, many more things to round up. As a matter of fact, let's see. We'll go to our traditional kickoff, when we remember, of the radio show. Bill tells us all the way from Portland, Maine, that our show is ready to go. It's a good thing he does tell us, or else we may sleep in. Daily Coast Radio is live now. Today, Kagro X, me, David Waldman, breaks the news that Christmas may be canceled this year after Kris Kringle is outed on social media as an agitator for Santifa. Yes, I thought that was probably likely to come next. I don't know where there is for Trump to go at this point. It can't get that much lower. So many things happening today, and so much we will be able to round up. It'll be an action-packed show, I'm sure. And then, of course, we have tomorrow for all the things that we missed today. And if we missed even all of that, remember, as always, to stay tuned for Justice Putnam and his West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy after our program. All the things that we may miss today because there's just so much. Greg Dworkin is here because there is so much. We have to get started on it. And no further delay. Tell them everything there is to know, Greg.
Okay, Jacksonville.
All right. Oh, is that the new, scoping it out as the new site for the convention or something else?
Yeah, well, that, and you wanted to know where Trump could go. Well, that's where he could go.
Oh, okay. Well, sure. I got another idea.
I got another idea, too, but, it's remarkable in terms of what's happening.
Why don't they invade North Carolina and just force them?
In passing, I saw this tweet from Noah Rothman, center-right analyst, who is turning out to be one of the most unimaginative analysts around, saying, yeah, sure, right, Trump is losing, but, things can tighten, and they usually do.
All right.
Okay, fine. Let's go through some of the stuff that says that, if anything, it may go in the other direction.
Okay.
And sure, he's correct. Of course he's correct. If there was no such thing as a pandemic, if the seismic change in attitude toward race wasn't happening while we speak, if the economy was not in the shape that it's in, if all of those things didn't happen, maybe he's right. And even then, Trump remains the most partisan, politically split president in recent memory. So it's really hard to figure out how partisan response is going to aid him in the usual way things come together. In fact, things are pretty fixed and they haven't moved for years, so why should they now? But let's go through some of this stuff.
Yeah, all right.
All right, some new polling out. And again, not all polling is quality polling, as Stu Rothenberg pointed out to me when we were discussing this on Twitter yesterday. I thought it was interesting and notable that when you look at Biden's polling versus Trump, he's starting to hit 50 a lot.
Okay.
And that's something that Hillary Clinton never did. She was basically stuck in 44, and even when they had similar leads, which was rare because they would oscillate. What would happen in 2016 is Clinton would have a lead, and then Trump would catch up, and then Clinton would have a lead, and then Trump would catch up. And the Trump catching up was basically the baseline.
Okay.
And then he'd say something stupid, or Access Hollywood would happen, and then Clinton would get a lead.
Yes.
And then that would wear off, and it would go back to close.
Okay.
And then Trump would do something, and then Clinton would have a lead again. But it was always like she would do 45 or less. And so it was the undecideds oscillating back and forth. What do I do? I don't know. I don't like either of them. What am I going to do? And we don't need to go into why they didn't like her, whether it was simply sexism or years and years and years of Fox News and the smear, whatever. Or maybe people just didn't like her, or she didn't go to Wisconsin and Michigan in the end. The bogus things, whatever you want to pick, it doesn't really matter. The point is, she never really got very much over 45, and Trump was never popular. It's just that he was able to parlay that into, I know you don't like both of us, but vote for me anyway, because you want something new and different. And so people did. That's just simply not working this year. Data for progress. Biden 54, Trump 40. Reuters Ipsos. Biden 46, Trump 38. And in fact, when you look at the Trump versus Biden poll, let me just run through some of the ones that Real Clear Politics carries, because they don't carry them all. CNN, Biden 55, Trump 41. NPR, Biden 50, Trump 43. You hear those 50s? Emerson, 53, Trump 47. The Hill, Harris X, pretty bad poll, Trump 47. Biden 47, Trump 37. IBD Tip, Trump 42, Biden 45. NBC News, Biden 49, Trump 42. Let's just go through, without telling you the poll, what the Trump numbers are. 41, 43, 47. That's Emerson, 37, 42, 42, 40, 41, 41. He's averaging 41.6. And he's basically stuck at 42. And, he doesn't really get higher than that. Biden is 55, 50, 53, 47, 45, 49, 47, 48, 52. He's averaging 49.6. And again, that's really different. So he's doing just fine in the polls. And if anything, that which has happened over the last week or so, after 2 weeks of Black Lives Matter, is pretty astounding. For example, Black Lives Matter has now gotten a net plus 28 point favorable, 53% support, 25% opposed in civics polling, while Donald Trump's job approval is 41% approve, 56 disapprove, minus 15. Black Lives Matter gets higher numbers than Donald Trump's job approval.
Okay, well, good. Yes.
Well, so this is the background for what's going on here. And somehow or other, the idea that, well, this is all going to magically change because, like, this is business as usual and nothing's different is just so weird. But when you
Magic
have
is
no
business as
imagination,
usual.
that's how you analyze things.
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we got back around to that and who was giving that analysis, because it occurs to me, like, it's going to fade as usual, or it's going to disappear like magic and business as usual. It's odd that magic should be our business as usual go-to. And I guess what really is our business as usual is, it doesn't really make sense how I get there, just so long as I say something middle of the road. All right, that'll be my analysis.
Well, the other new analysis that comes out, which is, I think, equally shaky and suspect,
Yeah.
is that Trump has magical powers and can somehow get everybody who hasn't made up their mind about him to rally around him. So his numbers don't go down, but they can go up somehow, magically.
It's Orange Lanternism.
Whereas,
Yes.
whereas for Biden, every gaffe is going to change everything.
Yes.
And they still can't give up on that. I mean, the latest one is the whole
He doesn't have to make a
discussion.
gaffe.
I won't even call it a controversy because it's not really a controversy over defunding the police.
Yes.
But Friday it was, a better than expected jobs report with shaky numbers.
Yeah, right.
All of
okay.
that was going to change well, none of it's
Everyone
changed. If
remembers
anything,
that
Biden still
already.
continues to roll.
Yeah.
You
Biden
know,
doesn't even have to
so it'll
make
be
a
something
gaffe
else. It'll be
himself.
some other thing that well, this will change everything. Nothing's changing. The trajectory is that Trump is slowly bleeding and Biden is slowly gaining. And for people who don't like Biden, they keep looking for reasons why that's not going to be so. And it is so. And, people just have to, accept the fact that Biden is a center-left moderate who's fine on most issues and simply cannot be painted as the wild-eyed radical, socialist, anti-cop, working-class guy that Republicans want to paint him at. It doesn't work.
Anti-working class. All right, well, I can try. Although he does have pocket squares, so,
Yeah, but, he's the guy that took the train. And,
Yeah,
everybody
that's-
knows that. You can't, make him into somebody he isn't.
Yeah, I guess not. I mean, he's
Now,
pretty
people
well
don't
defined.
like
We
it
have
because
that.
he is who he is, and I want him
Yeah,
to be somebody different from
Right.
my side because I want him to be more,
True.
fill in the. He
Tough
is who he
sailing
is.
for everyone. That appears to be the case and has been for, I don't know, what are we going on, 40, 50 years now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, at least we know who he is.
You see it in various and sundry places.
We
I
didn't
don't have a
vet
tremendous
Biden.
amount to say about the results of yesterday's primary, other than that there was an incredibly huge meltdown in Georgia
Yeah, that was the real
as the
result.
voter suppression that they've been practicing by not putting resources into voting are in stark relief for everybody to see. But let's look at an interesting place, Logan County, West Virginia.
All right.
It's the heart of coal
Where is it?
country.
Okay. Coal
Okay.
country.
And that's where a lot of the protest vote against establishment Democratic candidates comes from in a Democratic primary.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
West
In
Virginia, anyway.
2016, Hillary Clinton got 24% of the vote. This is where you vote for some random guy who might be in prison.
Well, is that who
Right?
they were voting
Obama
for? Or
in
is that
12
for...
got 45. Wasn't he running against some guy in the primary who was in prison?
That sounds plausible. Can't think about that.
So
back on
Biden
that.
got 51.
Okay, so they were protesting against people who get fewer votes.
It's their way to register the fact that I'm registered as a Democrat, but I don't like the Democrat Party in Washington because whatever.
Yes.
But actually, Biden did fairly okay there.
Yeah, well, 51 will do it. Okay.
Interestingly, 23% of the ballots for president were blank. Again, these are protest votes.
Yeah,
It's not like Biden isn't going to be the nominee. He's already the nominee.
Yeah. How about that? You gotta. I mean, I guess they're not that hard hit by the pandemic in that spot at the moment. I was just thinking about standing in line to leave your ballot blank.
Well, I was thinking more like social distancing while mining.
Yeah, I guess that's an issue too.
you know.
It's
But
only the second worst thing you can
that's
inhale
another
down
problem
there,
with the
though.
pandemic really, starting to rev up a little bit in the Southwest. But again, the position that Biden is in is actually quite good.
Yeah, it sounds all right to me.
Who realizes it? The
I wish it
Republican
was
Party
over
is
already.
realizing it. This is a piece from Axios. Trump aides despondent over Buffalo protester tweet.
They saw it? How did they do that?
They did.
That's incredible.
Republican senators are immune from seeing it.
Yes.
Well, I have a story about that, too.
Right.
My phone blew up yesterday with texts from White House aides, current informers, says Jonathan Swan, who seemed at their wits' end over President Trump's tweet that a 75-year-old Buffalo protester who was rushed to the hospital after being shoved by police last week could be an Antifa provocateur.
Yes.
Why it matters? They rarely register. I mean, he's a Catholic works person, so why they want to take on a religious aspect to this, I don't know. But just like the photo op with violence against protesters clearing a space so he could walk across the street, it didn't work as a photo op. It's losing him support. This is losing a tremendous amount of support because it's absolutely indefensible. Why it matters? They rarely register the president's tweets anymore, let alone complain about him. This one felt different. Here was Trump struggling in the polls, damaged with independents and women who hate his tone, trafficking in a bizarre conspiracy that he had seen on the right-wing OANN cable network to excuse a blatant example of police misconduct. And the person pushing that, by the way, also works for the Kremlin. I mean, gets paid, literally gets paid, not like Dana Rohrabacher, but over the table gets paid by the Kremlin.
Well, got to make ends
Works for
meet
RT,
these days.
in other words, as well as OANN at the same time.
That's odd.
All this on the morning of
guess
George
it is.
Floyd's funeral.
Yeah.
The context, POTUS aides in the campaign had constructed this week about getting Trump into the conversation around rebuilding, recovering, listening to ideas about police reform. Our friend Tim Scott will lead the discussion on the Republican side. One former aide remarked, "There's tweets like this that make him wonder whether Trump actually wants to get reelected."
Okay.
Okay, this from
he may
Politico. A seismic quake, Floyd killing transforms views on race. The magnitude of recent shifts in public opinion on race relations and police misconduct indicate the potential for longer-lasting change, and they just go and cite the polls. For example, this one is remarkable. In a CNN SSRS poll released Monday, 42% of voters said race relations would be an extremely important factor in their vote for president, a higher percentage than the share of voters who said the same of the economy, which was only at 40%. Healthcare was 39%, and coronavirus was 31%.
I heard economic anxiety was racism. So that's
Well,
like
everybody
70%.
knew that the jobs report was going to change everything, except, you know what, there's other things going on.
All right.
The survey shows a significant disparity in the views and experiences of white and black Americans, that we knew, with a much higher share of African Americans saying racism is a big problem and the justice system favors white people, as well as a higher percentage of black people saying that race had been a factor in whether they feel safe or were denied housing or jobs. And Joe Biden is making housing and police reform a centerpiece of his racial healing platform, by the way. He had a big op-ed in the USA Today today.
Today?
USA Today, this morning.
Should be a new
But the
paper just
60%
about
of white
the
people
USA
who said
Today.
racism is a big problem is nearly 3 times as high as November 2011 CNN Kaiser family poll.
2011?
It was only 21% of white Americans in 2011 who believed it was a big problem. Now it's 60. That's enormous. Big
That's
difference.
weird. But yeah, I mean, all right. Well, that's an awful long time, but okay. I'm glad it.
Well,
Came to
Ferguson was
pass.
2016, and you're
Well,
looking at
what were
numbers
people
that are
watching
closer
in
to
2011?
35, 40. Now it's 60. It's a majority.
All right. Well, that's that whole arc of justice thing, I guess. Good.
Yeah. Republicans
whoever said that was
fear
smart.
Trump's weakened standing jeopardizes the party in November. This is from Robert Costa and Philip Rucker in the Washington Post this morning.
Okay.
And I described it as celestial music to my ears. A raft of fresh polling nationally and in battleground states shows Trump losing ground to presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden, a precipitous slide. I thought it was more a slow bleed, but they describe it as a precipitous slide that has triggered deep distress within the GOP about the incumbent's judgment and instincts, as well as fears that voters could sweep the party out of power completely on Election Day.
Well, That would be nice.
I would venture to suggest maybe Trump is not the favorite. Trump's ability to shape cultural flashpoints also appears to have ebbed, as some Republican leaders and legions of large corporations are openly supporting Black Lives Matter, despite risking retaliation from the White House. They don't seem to be afraid of him anymore. That's what happens when your polls drop.
Now that would be something. Yes, right. That would loosen up a lot of interesting changes if they could finally realize that there was no reason to be afraid of him, or at least more reason to be afraid of others.
This is Emperor's, new clothes stuff.
Yeah. Well, good.
Meanwhile, few Trump allies... Go ahead, get that image out of your head. Meanwhile, few Trump allies have been willing to embrace some of the president's more extreme views, such as his baseless suggestion on Tuesday that a 75-year-old man seen in a viral video last week bleeding from the ear after being shoved by police in Buffalo was a radical provocateur faking his injury. And perhaps emboldened by Trump's diminished standing, not to mention their own outrage, some Republicans have acted in outright opposition to the president, led by a number of prominent retired military leaders, as well as Mitt Romney and Lisa Murkowski. But there's no sign yet of a mass exodus in the runaway Trump train. If anything, most elected Republicans see themselves as prisoners on board, calculating that jumping off would lead to almost certain defeat. According to interviews with more than a dozen party strategists, many of whom spoke on the condition of anonymity to talk candidly, and this is my addition, so that they can get a job in the near future.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I don't know what's worth preserving your position in government for at this point. I mean,
paycheck's a paycheck, dude. I
guess so. In these uncertain times, now
exactly
more than ever,
right. I mean, and what else am I qualified for? Conversations at the highest ranks of the party have reached what one veteran operative called the quote acceptance phase of grieving, where there's an understanding that he's president until at least November. There's not much we can do about it.
Well, there was, but we could bring it back. I mean, if you want another shot at it, I'll be happy to impeach you.
I always like to get a window into Republican thinking, since it's like trying to learn a foreign language. Right. Most of the Republican office holders standing for re-election are counting on Trump's core supporters to turn out. And after weathering more than 3.5 years of political storms, they see no advantage in breaking with the president now. There's no middle ground, said Brendan Buck, a former top advisor to the past two Republican House speakers, Paul Ryan and John Boehner. I continue to believe there's really no political upside to running away from Trump. You gain nothing, and you raise the ire of not just the president, but people who support him. That's why George P. Bush, running in Texas, has declared he's a Trump supporter.
Yes. The P stands for, all right, we don't know.
Pusillanimous.
I guess so. P. Bush. That's where you go when you can't find the porta potty.
I suppose. I guess. Still, some vulnerable Republican incumbents are looking for ways to distance themselves from Trump. Good luck.
All right.
And by the way, they're concerned it's going to hurt Cory Gardner, Susan Collins, Martha McSally, and other incumbents.
Well, it is. They're gone. Forget about them.
Good. Look, said one operative, nobody could afford at this point to get on the wrong side of Trump. You can kind of play it cool and don't have to comment on everything he does. And that's the advice they're giving to the senators, and that's why the senators can't see any of his tweets.
Yeah. Right. They just that's probably a great idea. They should just have the Sergeant-at-Arms block access to Twitter, or at least to Trump's tweets, for everybody. Sneak in, grab everybody's phone, and mute Trump. That's their strategy.
The funny thing was, Clara McCaskill was on Morning Joe this morning explaining that that's how it doesn't work.
Oh.
She said as soon as Trump tweets, every comms person in your office finds the tweet and then lets you know what it is so you can be prepared for questions for when they inevitably come.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that is the way it goes. And yeah, so
you said that's how it works. So the idea that I didn't see it is like ridiculous.
Yeah. Unless at some point maybe the comms people figure, look, the comment is going to be, I didn't see it. So rather than accidentally spill the beans that you did see it, I won't tell the boss. I'll just say there's been a Trump tweet for which your answer is I haven't seen the tweet. Well, what did it say? If I tell you, you might screw up and say something about it. You didn't see the tweet.
Or as Tim Miller in The Bulwark puts it, Republican senators suffer sudden onset of hysterical blindness.
That could certainly explain it.
Marco Rubio doesn't read Twitter. He only writes on it.
Right.
Yes. President Trump sorts this theory from an OAN segment that was, I crap you not, reported by a man in a thick Russian accent who also, by total coincidence, works for the Russian state-owned propaganda network Sputnik. And so these boneless wonders persist in pretending not to see the things right in front of their eyes and claiming that words and tweets don't matter, convincing themselves that feigned ignorance and being false to the truth is a righteous path.
Sure. Why not? If you tweet enough Bible quotes, I guess everything's a righteous path.
He's involved in the Lincoln Project, which you can tell from some of their ads.
That makes sense.
This is L.A. Times. Trump vilifies elderly protester as his campaign struggles to relaunch.
Yeah.
And
That's
he may be
something.
digging
Some
himself
headline.
into deeper trouble. There goes the Noah Rothman idea that everything will just consolidate and it's like business as usual. Even as polls show sliding support for the president among older voters, Trump suggested Tuesday that a 75-year-old protester who fell and hit his head, drawing blood after being shoved by a pair of armed police officers, may have deliberately provoked police or faked his injuries. Way to go, seniors.
Yeah, all right. Shoo. It's... Okay, so all this came from OANN and a Russian guy on OANN.
Yeah. For now, polls suggest Trump is the weakest incumbent since President George H.W. Bush, beset by economic woes, and the Trump campaign's internal polling is just as dismal as a raft of, there's that word again, you've made it popular.
Thank you.
A raft of public surveys that show presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden building a significant lead. He's up 10 points in an average of the most recent polls and holds a 25-point edge with women. Do women vote? I think they do. More worrying for the president, Trump has seen eroding support from white men, the bedrock of his base in internal polling, according to a person familiar with the data who spoke on the condition of cowardice. No, anonymity. Trump's aides hope to regain ground before November by trumpeting any signs of recovery.
Yeah, well.
He's desperate to re-energize his base and get back on TV, and that's why he's going to Jacksonville.
Okay. He needs a show of force to get back on TV, and I'm not certain why they don't just force their way into North Carolina. Say to hell with you. We are having the convention. The Army
Increasingly
will kill you.
unnerved by the polling data, Trump has approved hiring several staffers who were part of his 2016 campaign. So Jason Miller's back, and what's his name? Corey Lewandowski's back.
Jason
Bo Hicks
Miller.
is back, and they're going to have like a reunion party and try to do it again.
Yeah, Lewandowski recently was in the news. He was being nominated to some, stupid, low-profile presidential commission. Was it a commission on the presidential, or was it a commission on presidential scholarship, or some kind of, who knows what the hell this board is? But yeah, he and David Bossie, I think, both were being put on that. But Jason Miller, I didn't know was coming back.
Yeah,
Interesting. Just in time for Father's Day. That's good news.
Yeah. Now, the end of this LA Times article is interesting because they take head on this whole idea of not only are the great jobs numbers, which, by the way, 13% unemployment aren't great, and it's really 16 anyway. And besides that, people know whether they're doing okay or not okay economically without having these Friday morning jobs reports tell them. But that's the job side of it. And the pandemic, of course, is acting and flaring up again, which isn't helping him. So then his new idea was going to be, well, we're going to jump all over this defund the police thing, and we're going to make ourselves a law and order person. As many people have pointed out, it isn't 1968. Not only is it not 1968, the person you're acting like in 1968 isn't Richard Nixon, who was actually a pretty good political operative and went for the suburbs. You're acting like George Wallace.
Yeah. Right. Well,
and George Wallace didn't win. So Biden's campaign this week said he doesn't support calls to defund police, a key demand of some protesters. I don't know who's demanding it because what they're really talking about is something different altogether. And obviously, if you're talking about it, you're losing. So it's a losing slogan, even though it's a winning concept. Democrats are completely playing into our hands by talking about firing cops, except they're not, instead of the 40 million Americans out of work, said one operative involved in the president's reelection. Which gives you an idea how dumb they are and why they're going to lose. Who sees the issue as one that can help Trump win back white suburbia.
Okay.
Nothing motivates quite like fear, he said.
Huh? Well, there used to be that.
As if white suburbia is suddenly going to turn around and say, oh, well, the 3.5 years where he's repelled me, that changed yesterday.
Yes.
Because somebody came up with a slogan that the Democrats say that they are not adopting.
Right, and you have to change one of the three words, and we're not sure how to change it, and so therefore, I don't know what. Dems in disarray and we lose, I guess?
Something like that. But playing on voters' anxieties is harder for the incumbent, and much of the president's incendiary comments and tweets could contribute to, quote, an exhaustion factor, the operative acknowledged,
I'm exhausted.
in which voters opt for a safe establishment choice after years of tumult. You know who that is? That's Joe Biden. That's why Joe Biden,
Joe P. Biden,
with all his flaws, is a pretty decent candidate to be running against Trump, basically because he's basically a pretty decent guy. And there's nothing you can do to change people's minds about that. Anyway, back to somebody who's willing to be named. When you're the incumbent, you want to run on peace, prosperity, and let me finish what I started, said Ed Rogers, a former top White House aide to President George H.W. Bush. What's the job Trump wants voters to let him finish?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think it's putting on his bronzer.
Ruining the country?
You got to get around the eyes.
I haven't completely ruined the country yet. I need 4 more years.
That's true. Parts of it are not on fire. I can fix that.
Right, exactly. Nick Gorovich has his Navigator polling because it's Wednesday. And some interesting things there. But I think one of the interesting ones, do we have a break? Did we have a break?
We did. We talked right through it, and that's okay. So keep going at this point. The podcast people will have to catch up on the 2 minutes that we somehow missed. The alarm didn't
Abby
go.
says break.
Yeah, well, you can take that break. We have to wait for our next one instead. Oh, look at that. So all the alarms didn't get set. No point in setting the 9:27 alarm, I guess, for that matter. All right, so I'll have to go back and I'll note for myself that we missed that break, and we'll highlight what, or I'll have to, maybe I can, well, no, I can't go back until afterwards and figure out what we missed. But the podcast people, or anybody who was listening live, stay tuned early. We'll try and turn the podcast around quickly so you can miss catch up on the critical 2 minutes you missed in that first break, and I don't know whether I'm going to reverse engineer a break in it or not. But we'll figure it out. I'll let Abby do this.
Some Abby barking in the background, so we'll just give you an update of our generator project here.
Why not?
So today's fill day, and right now the propane people have rolled up to fill the giant tank, and then the trench that holds the gas line running from the tank to the generator gets filled. So today's fill day.
I see.
And tomorrow, the final hookups. Friday, we fire up the generator, and the project is done.
Okay.
So, hopefully none of that will interfere with the Friday podcast, but Abby is letting me know that the propane guys are here to fill the tank.
Yes. Well, Friday podcast.
She's very good about those things.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to know. We wanted an update on the generator situation. We didn't get the usual break to catch our wind here, so we'll labor on through this. Friday podcast, though, our update on the Friday podcast. Rerun Friday podcast. So don't worry about ruining the Friday podcast. Friday podcast is canceled on well, everyone wants to know, right? On account of colonoscopy. It's important to advocate for these things, even though it's not the most fun subject.
You're going to do Katie Couric? You're going to show the colonoscopy on radio?
That's right. So you'll hear the whole thing.
You'll talk our way through it?
Right. You'll hear. Well, I guess you'll hear me snoring at some point, and then that's it. I'm out, and then you wake up and it's over. That's how I understand these things go. Luckily, they have professionals who keep their eyes open for the rest of the procedure.
Right, that is how it goes. Yeah. And so if you are of that age where you have to have these things, please have it done. It's important. So Navigator has this polling, getting back to our topic here, and the role of video and attitudes on the protest should not be understated, says Nick Gorovich, the pollster. Half of Americans say they've seen many videos of police protest interactions, and another 32% say some. By a 47 to 33 margin, voters say the videos have made them more sympathetic to the protesters. Which are the numbers overall, as we've been talking about. And interestingly, these days, Black Lives Matter at 59%, and the police at 59% have equal favorability ratings.
Interesting. Okay, well, who would have thought that they'd be tied?
Right. Who would have thought that? With Democrats, it's 85 for Black Lives Matter, and the police 40. Independents 52-54, so pretty much tied. And Republicans, of course, 84. So the point there is, if you're going to try to be the law and order president, it's like everything else Trump does. It's only going to work on his base, and at that, a segment of his base. While the larger public says, yeah, but I saw the videos, so that's no.
Yeah. I mean, what a strange month or so it's been.
I'm for law and order.
videos,
Does
too.
that mean shoving a 75-year-old guy and cracking his skull?
And if not, does that mean screaming in
Is
the
that
face
the law
of police
part,
for
or
a
is that the
haircut?
order part?
Yeah.
I ordered you to do that?
Right.
Is that what you're saying? You're responsible for that? You're responsible for clearing those people in the park? We all saw the tear gas stuff. There's a remarkable piece of journalism that was done by the Washington Post, by the way, if you haven't seen it.
I don't
They
know.
put
Which one
together
was it?
like a 12-minute video
Yes.
of everything they had, from police scanners to overhearing people speaking, all the different news outlets they could possibly find. They put together a story
Yes.
on video of what happened with clearing the protesters, clearly showing it was on orders and that the protesters were peaceful.
Yeah. It was, I saw most of it. I saw it at the wrong time of day when the heat was really bearing down on me, and I got through about 10 minutes of the 12, and then I said, what happened in the last 2 minutes? I closed my eyes. It was it was compelling stuff nonetheless, but it was just the wrong time of day for me. But yeah, I did mention it yesterday, recommended it, put it in a roundup. We'll see if we can put it there again. It really was interesting. Just in the way it was done was interesting, not to mention how good the story was.
Right. But again, the overall bigger picture point here is that when you have video,
yes,
all the rantings
Right.
like disappear.
Like the coronavirus.
It's like, I saw the video and you're telling me he tripped. You're telling me you're the law and order president, and I'm watching the video of you and Bill Barr deciding to turn on American citizens with chemicals and gassing
They're
them.
not chemicals. Yeah, it's pretty amazing that they're standing
You said
there
it
continuing
that
to
you
do
didn't.
this.
I saw it that you did. That's what wins.
Yeah, that's true. Usually in the contest between you
Who are you
and
gonna believe,
your
me or your
line,
lying
right?
eyes?
Yeah, it does go that way. There's also another interesting piece of journalism that I think. This one was from Politico, but good companion piece to it. I guess they have spoken. I'm sure in most cases on condition of anonymity, but they do have some names attached to them, to members of the National Guard who had been dispatched to Washington from the various states, speaking about their experience that night and at Lafayette Square Park, and saying, yeah, I couldn't believe what was going on. And we felt really awkward and strange there because, thankfully we weren't asked to do too much more than stand around looking menacing, because I don't know if we would have done it. Interesting perspective. People who are... remember, the National Guard, for whatever reason, Trump chose to go with the National Guard chiefly there, and I guess that's because it sounds like old-timey and in terms of responding to... If you want to portray something as a riot and conjure up images of '68, then using the National Guard maybe is good symbolically. But these people are saying to themselves, I signed up for the one weekend a month thing and not this suppressing insurrection nonsense. Besides which, I know all the people on the other side of that barricade. I'm not going to.
So the Robert E. Lee statue that was going to come down may eventually come down, but I guess a relative of the person who put it up is suing over it, and so it's on temporary hold.
Well, do you want it? We can give it to you, relative.
Yeah, you put it in your living room.
Yeah.
It's a large statue, so you better have a large living room.
Okay.
So Eric Columbus makes the case that Virginia's George Thomas, Civil War general for the northern side, ought to be the one that you make a statue of.
Oh, do we not have one?
I don't know. Probably you have statues to everybody down there, but that's the one that should be elevated to the Robert E. Lee status. So it's a pretty good argument here. He grew up, George Thomas, in a slaveholding family near North Carolina. In adulthood, employed a couple of slaves as domestic servants, but played a key role in winning the war that ended slavery. Besides Grant and Sherman, few, if any, Union generals were as important.
Okay.
And then goes on to talk about why.
Where's the
He
statue
served
here?
under Robert E. Lee at West Point. I just gave you the tweet thread where that is.
Yeah.
Where he was an instructor while Lee was superintendent.
Okay.
Lee was offered a top command in the Union Army, but chose instead to lead Virginia's troops and later all Confederate forces. Thomas, in contrast, decided to fight for the Union and to uphold the oath he had sworn upon entering the U.S. Army. Now, there is an oath, and that's a good thing. And, by the way, that's why the Navy is now banning the Confederate battle flag.
Getting around to it eventually.
Getting around to it.
Yeah, all right, that's good. That is interesting. Is this statue not him, or is this just they said you needed a statue, like in case you didn't know what a statue is? This is one. And
yeah, I don't know. I can't tell from the picture, but he saw secession as invalid, except in the case of tyranny, and said of fellow Southerners the tyranny didn't exist, and they well know it. His wife was from the North, but he was a son of the South, and his sisters never spoke to him again.
All right. Well,
Jeb Stuart wrote that he would like to hang him as a traitor to his native state. Nonetheless, he persisted, leading the Army of the Cumberland. Thomas was essential to the Union's success in the Western Theater, and when the war began, Thomas' views on race seemed to have been typical of his time and place, but the war changed him. He supported the enlistment of black soldiers, and like most Southern whites, initially doubted their prowess. Experience taught him differently. He depended heavily on black troops at the Battle of Nashville. Their discipline and courage exceeded some of the white units, despite suffering heavy casualties, and he helped rout the Confederates. Gentlemen, the question is settled, Thomas said to his staff officers. Negroes will fight.
Okay.
After the war, Thomas helped lead the military occupation of the defeated South as commander of the Department of the Cumberland, and he worked to protect the rights of blacks in Tennessee and Kentucky in the face of white hostility and limited military resources. Kentucky and Tennessee still having issues, by the way. Yes. He received little help from President Andrew Johnson, a Tennessean who took office days after the war's end, and Johnson frequently wrote Thomas to object to black troops serving in the occupied South. Thomas tactfully pushed back, emphasizing the importance of black troops in keeping the peace and ensuring justice for black freedmen. Thomas was facing down an erratic, blustering president who wanted to kick a minority group out of the military. Does that sound familiar? Yes. He was often mentioned as a possible presidential candidate, but had no interest, and then he left us. In 1879, this statue, the one you're referring to that you can see, was erected in Washington, about a mile from my house and half a mile from the White House, says Eric Columbus.
Okay.
It stands as a rebuke to Lee, his fellow Virginian. It demonstrates that we can honor Southern white heritage without exalting those who tried to rip apart our nation for slavery's stake.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's a good point, you know. But what do you hate white? No.
Sure.
Well, you hate the South? No. Here's the son of the South. Let's elevate him.
Okay. Yes, that is a statue.
But it's all about our heritage.
It's a famous one. I can't believe I can't remember that. Thompson Circle was not a place I was spending a lot of time in Washington, D.C., but it's a nice place.
You don't look at statues.
Yeah,
I mean, you
right.
Ask them, but
this is the
you don't
thing
see
that's
them.
in the way when I'm trying to get to. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, anyway,
when you're walking around New York City, sometimes because New York City is always changing, they're always building, you know. Yeah. But every once in a while, if you actually look at the building you're passing, you'll see a street level plaque. You know, in this house grew up the Chief Justice of the United States, or some guy that you actually had heard of but didn't. You know, he lived here. He did things. Yes. Oh, that's nice. I've forgotten all about it. I didn't even notice that was there. I walk past it every day.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, you know, that's true, and especially true, I think, at some point in Washington, D.C. When I worked downtown all the time. It wasn't until I was making my last couple runs there that I realized, hey, my drive to work is actually quite scenic. I should be paying attention to things, but it's just stuff in your way when you're trying to get to work. Okay. Well, he does have the statue. Yeah.
I mean, it's like, you know, when you live in New York and people come to visit, let's go see the Statue of Liberty. When's the last time you were at the Statue? Do you go every day? No, I haven't been there since I was like 9 years old.
Right. But, you know, I know where it is. I'll get around to it. Right. And same thing wherever you go. You see the landmarks when you're about to leave. Oh, you know, I've never gone to that.
I want to see Times Square. Okay, why?
Square, you know, it's not even square, is it?
No, but, you know, we'll go. You want to go? We'll go. Just not New Year's Eve.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see. Anything else we need to catch up on, or having anything else installed?
Today.
Okay.
I think fine. You know it's just helpful to really.
You only have a certain amount of minutes in you. You know.
Yeah. Well, it's just helpful to keep some perspective on where we're at. You know, basically Biden is winning, Trump is losing, it isn't just that we're seeing, changes in the polls or a little bit of a surge for Biden and a little bit of an ebb for Trump. The point that I've tried to make over the last month is that the structural reasons for this have everything to do with who Trump is, and you can't reverse them. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that suddenly we're going to have a surge for Trump is based on the inability to simply admit that Trump is as awful as he is, I think. People will rightly say, well, we still have 5 months left. 5 months ago, would you ever have thought that we'd be talking about coronavirus? And that's an example of how everything can change. Well, that's true, but you don't have coronavirus level events happening every day. Yeah, well, what about the Black Lives Matter movement? Okay, well, if it's unlikely to have one, it's even more unlikely to have two.
That's true.
So the idea that we're going to have another 5 months of completely new and different things, could it happen? Sure.
Trump is
what are the odds?
Well,
not that likely. I think we're still dealing with the aftermath of what we're dealing with right now. We're not even over the coronavirus. Well, what about the second wave? We're not even done with the first wave,
I've seen people trying to declare this a second
because they
wave.
opened up too soon. The experts were right. We're still dealing with that. And if you want to change the subject because it's painful, fine. But the virus doesn't care.
That is true. I'm seeing a movement on to declare this resurgence of what really is the first wave to be the second wave.
Well, that absolves you of responsibility because you decided to open up.
That true, right? It does, and I guess it also maybe it tamps down on anxieties about the fall. No, we already had the second wave, and I don't think there's anything that says there can't be a third one if you engineer it.
Well, actually, if you go back and look at 18.
Yeah.
The first wave was little, and the second wave was ginormous.
Yeah.
And then there was a third wave, which was pretty big.
So there is a third wave. All right. So it really waves. I mean, I guess if you just keep going and spreading it around, it's not like you can't go past the Ninth Symphony because of Beethoven. If there want to be a 10th wave,
all this to say,
breathe on each other.
People need to protest. I totally understand that, but please wear your mask. It's not over.
Okay. And even though the right wing circulating, in addition to just protesting masks, now circulating pseudoscientific treatises that insist that mask wearing is not only unhelpful, it is harmful, and holding up their favorite quotes taken out of context or manipulated or flipped around from their favorite scientist who they hated last week, Anthony Fauci. So I don't know exactly.
I don't know. So I'm gonna finish my segment. And
All right.
I'll finish it with a Politico piece.
That is
which Dan Dresner tweeted out because I think it kind of sums up a lot of what we've been saying here this morning.
George Politico.
And the Politico piece is entitled Trump's latest attempt to tag Biden as a radical flops.
Okay.
Progressives largely gave the presumptive Democratic nominee a pass after he rejected the defund the police movement. And Dresner says, politically, this story is a microcosm of how Trump's campaign can try all it wants to paint Biden as a lefty radical and how it won't work. It's also, in all seriousness, the first story I've read the entire cycle that praises Biden's campaign for being nimble.
Okay. Right.
Which is pretty
Take
funny.
It when you can get
No, that's not what it's known for.
No. He looks pretty radical there in that shirt and the coat and everything. Yeah, it's pretty difficult to sell the idea of a silver-haired radical. I mean, they exist, but that's not him. Nor is it the guy that got pushed over in Buffalo either, as it turns out.
Right. Anyway, with that, remember, seniors are the most likely voters. So when you're talking about, what about likely voters? We're talking about likely voters. You can't use likely voter screen in these polls really until September. So when you see them now, take it with a grain of salt. Look at the registered voter number. But I am continuing to surprisingly see polls out that show that the likely voters are actually, if anything, a little bit more pro-Biden than the registered voters, which is the exact opposite of what you'd expect. And the reason is that those likely voters tend to be seniors in those screens. And this year, seniors are actually moving toward Biden.
Well, I mean, they're being driven that way by Trump, who's insane, and
Yeah,
All right.
so that's a
Keep
story.
doing
Have
it.
a good rest of the day.
Okay.
And
Thank
we'll
you.
go on from
I
there.
will. All right. Very good. And
I'll be
we'll
back tomorrow. We'll do it again.
check in on the generator tomorrow.
Friday, there's no show, but that's usually just you.
Right. So,
And then
as far as you're concerned.
Monday, I'll talk to you again. But
Okay.
tomorrow first.
Very good. We'll do it one day at a time, beginning with Thursday.
One day at a time. Wasn't that a TV soap opera?
Yes. And I think it came back recently somehow, even though it wasn't the same. I don't know. Everything's got a gritty reboot, so I suppose.
Right. One day at a time with the guiding light from General Hospital. All right. Take care, and I'll talk to you.
Okay. Very good. See you tomorrow. Oh, well, One Day at a Time was not a soap opera. It was a sitcom. But it's a good soap opera name. That's true. We could use that. All right. Let's see. Where did we want to go from there? Let me open up that Politico piece that I had been mentioning. P for Politico. That's what explains George P. Bush here. It really strikes me as a ridiculous. I don't know. All right. Anyway, I thought he was like 12 years old, too, George P. Bush. But I understand he grew up and started politicking. All right. The Politico piece that I mentioned, the headline here, what I saw was just absolutely wrong. National Guardsmen, it's gendered, struggle with their role in controlling protests. Politico spoke to 10 National Guardsmen who have taken part in the protest response across the country since the killing of George Floyd while in police custody. It was George Floyd who was in police custody, not these guardsmen. Though that would have been very interesting. Daniel Lipman is the author of the piece. Private Sikenya Lynch. I think I've got that pronunciation right. How about this? Ready? S-I apostrophe and then Kenya, the country, like Sikenya Lynch. I hope I haven't somehow mangled it. A member of the D.C. National Guard was on duty at Lafayette Square near the White House last Monday when U.S. Park Police cleared the area of protesters ahead of President Donald Trump's now infamous photo op. Lynch said she supports the protests and that her brother was among the demonstrators on the other side of the line, adding that he coughed a lot due to the tear gas fired into the crowd. Just a reminder, everyone's bringing this up every once in a while, and it's a good reminder. It's a bad thing to be doing now in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, whether you have the coronavirus or not. It's worse if you do, of course, if you're coughing and possibly spreading the virus to others. But, it's a tough time to have a cough of any kind out there. People look at you funny. I guess if it's in the middle of being tear gassed, they're not looking at you funny so much, but it's not a good situation. Anyway, she goes on to say, I was happy to see him out there, to walk for me when I couldn't, she said, adding that if she hadn't been activated as a citizen soldier, she would have been among the protesters to support the people, and I wanted to support what was right. So we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that that is going to be true for a number of people who happen to find themselves, for whatever reason, on the other side of the line. National Guard, probably chief among them. The police have kind of been indoctrinated there. That's their day-to-day lives. But average citizen soldiers, as they call them, who spend most of their time on the other side, probably not going to find themselves so easily automatically adopting the side that their orders would have them take, particularly if they think they're coming from an insane president and a power structure that's bent on their own destruction. Politico spoke to 10 National Guardsmen who have taken part in the protest response across the country since the killing of George Floyd while in police custody. Many guardsmen said they felt uncomfortable with the way they were used to handle the unrest because demonstrators lumped them in with the police. They felt that while they swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, their presence at times intimidated Americans, that was the idea, from expressing their opinions and even escalated the tension. And in the case of guardsmen involved in the Lafayette incident, some felt used. As a military officer, what I saw was more or less really effed up. And they go with the F and a couple of dashes version of this one, and it does say effed up. Says one D.C. guardsman who was deployed to Lafayette Square last Monday and who, like some others, spoke on condition of anonymity to speak freely. The official line from the White House that the protesters had turned violent, he said, is false. And, of course, Greg mentioned the video compilation from the Washington Post, and everybody else who observed in any manner will confirm all of that. The crowd was loud but peaceful, and at no point did I feel in danger. That's interesting. So, and it goes on to say, and I was standing right there in the front of the line, he said. So imagine, inside, being behind one fence and then later now two fences and Secret Service snipers on top of all of this, plus the National Guard, and still saying, I got to get into that bunker and we got to gas these people. It's getting out of control. Well, the guardsmen didn't feel in danger. Of course, on the other hand, I guess you could say, well, you didn't feel in danger because you had a gas mask and a gun and were backed up by lunatics who wanted to beat the crap out of everybody that could have posed danger to you. So I suppose it's, there's another angle from which to look at this. But he does say the crowd was loud but peaceful, and at no point did I feel in danger, and I was standing right there in the front. A lot of us are still struggling to process this, but in a lot of ways, I believe I saw civil rights being violated in order for a photo op. That's the quote, and I think in order to stage a photo op is, of course, what he meant here. I'm here to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and what I just saw goes against my oath, and to see everyone trying to cover up what really happened, the guardsman continued, what I saw was just absolutely wrong. And I wonder what it would take, how far could they have been pushed before they either walked off the job or, I don't know, I guess if you're contemplating any situation, turned around and either joined the protesters, or if they in dire circumstances, in the third world scenario where we always imagine we are not but others are, they turn their guns in the other direction. How far off from that are we? Let's see. There's considerably more to the story, but of course we have a break coming up. Let's start in on the next section and then start up the music and make our way out of here. Since the protest on Lafayette Square last Monday, much of the public's attention has been focused on a decision to clear the area so Trump, flanked by advisors, could pose for photos in front of St. John's Episcopal Church holding a Bible. In the days that followed, the debate shifted to whether the police used tear gas to break up the protests. The White House insisted they didn't. Yet a spokesman for the Park Police later acknowledged to Vox that it was a mistake to be that definitive, since tear gas is an umbrella term covering a number of chemical irritants. One of the guardsmen at the scene said the White House isn't being truthful. I've been tear gassed before. I was there the night before when we got tear gassed. There was tear gas there on Monday evening, he said. He added that he and some of his advisors felt the effects of the tear gas from their colleagues because they didn't have masks on. In a statement, Captain Chelsea Johnson, a spokesperson for the D.C. National Guard, responded to accounts of guardsmen who had been accidentally affected by the tear gas. Well, we can tell you about what those reactions were. They cheered up. After this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. It occurs to me as I was reading on our way out here, I'm not certain exactly what this particular guardsman was saying. How do you read this? This is was one of the guardsmen at the scene said the White House isn't being truthful about the use of tear gas, which says, I've been tear gassed before. And at first that made me think, okay, well, as part of your training, they sometimes will expose you to tear gas so that you know what that is all about and know how to put on your mask when a chemical agent has been deployed against you. Is that what we're talking about, or have you been tear gassed before because you were on the other end of a protest? That's entirely possible too, given that these folks spend most of their time as civilians, and as we found out in the very beginning of the piece, sometimes will find themselves on the other end of the protest, because these protests have been going on for a long time because the problem's been going on since forever. So I'm not really sure, but I've been tear gassed before. Then he says, I was there the night before when we got tear gassed. There was tear gas there also on Monday evening, is I guess what he's trying to say here. But was he saying he was there on Sunday evening? Was he there as a civilian protester and then found himself activated? That's a wild story right there. We'll get the movie rights to that story. Be a protester on Sunday night and a National Guardsman on Monday. But that's kind of what it sounds like. I have been tear gassed before. I was there the night before when we got tear gassed. Like, the troops don't talk about themselves as having been they may have been exposed to tear gas when other cops or other soldiers deploy it and they're not ready for it, but they wouldn't ordinarily. I wouldn't say, well, we got tear gassed. They got tear gassed and it drifted over to us, and I didn't have a mask on, so I ended up getting tear gassed. But I wouldn't have put it that way. I don't know. That's odd. It could be a real fascinating story all in exploring that, but they don't do that because Politico brushes by everything. All the you got deadlines. This is how many words I have to write. You brush past the nuance. There's so much good stuff buried in bad stories sometimes. Anyway, so that's what he says. And then he says, he added that he and some of his soldiers felt the effects of the tear gas from their colleagues because they didn't have their masks on. Then it was Captain Chelsea Johnson, Chelsi is the spelling. Chelsea Johnson, spokesperson for the D.C. National Guard, responded to accounts of guardsmen who had been accidentally affected by tear gas by saying they were instructed to put their gas masks on if and when, I guess maybe this is a written statement, it's if/when they were ordered to, or put your gas mask on when you notice that the police are putting theirs on. Every guardsman was issued a gas mask, she said. The U.S. Park Police has acknowledged firing pepper balls into the crowd, which is also a chemical irritant. And I guess the fact that you were issued a gas mask tells you that certainly the use of gas was contemplated. And that I guess then if you're deploying agents that fog the place up and nobody can breathe and they're tearing up and they're coughing and choking, and you have been tear gassed before in your life and you say to yourself, this is awfully familiar, and you've been given a gas mask, chances are that there was tear gas being used. So you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to figure that one out. While the park police cleared out the protesters, some guardsmen said they felt they were there to actually prevent the police from beating up protesters instead of the other way around. I didn't see very much evidence of their doing that, but that's an interesting way of feeling. I'll acknowledge your feelings. Let's hear more about it. I felt that we were more protecting the people from the police, said D.C. Guardsman Specialist Isaiah Lynch, who is unrelated to Sekenya Lynch. Well, okay, that's an interesting perspective. The event has taken a toll on some guardsmen. We have a lot of National Guardsmen who are struggling with this because unlike in combat where you have an enemy, these are our neighbors, our friends, our family, the first guard officer said. Very true. The officer, and maybe that's why Trump was trying to bring in National Guard troops from other states. Then you won't have that problem and you'll be happy to beat them. The officer said he even told General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, just before the park police moved in, that the protests had been peaceful that day, a sentiment that was shared by 3 other guardsmen who were there. It's interesting to get a chance to speak to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff as a National Guardsman. To no avail, but it was interesting, I'm sure, to have that opportunity. Representative Max Rose, a Democrat of New York, who is also a guardsman, was activated for the coronavirus pandemic, but not for the unrest. Interesting term, as usual. And he said, using the National Guard during a peaceful protest for deterrence value is not really the correct way of employing the forces, which should instead be used as partners with local law enforcement and as a de-escalating force. I guess it'd be interesting to think of them as UN peacekeepers. And maybe that would be their most useful role in this situation, given that it seems that the police, as opposed to using the police to quell unrest or if there were riots going on, suppressing riots, they're in this game as partisan players. They have, they're combatants in this, and the National Guard, to the extent that they're used, ought to be there as UN peacekeepers, armed enough to stop violence on both sides. It's an interesting thought. Tori Osterholm, the D.C. National Guard's Director of Psychological Health, said in an interview that many guardsmen have reached out to her in the past week to express the pain and confusion they struggled with during and after the mission, both for what they witnessed and how the protesters reacted. One guardsman told her, "I never thought I'd get a bottle thrown at me and be told I should die and even kill myself," Osterholm said. "There's not enough Kevlar to protect you from those kinds of statements spoken in your own language." I don't know what other language it would be, but I gotcha. Major General William Walker, commander of the D.C. National Guard, acknowledged the challenges guardsmen faced in a Sunday briefing with reporters. "I have some guardsmen whose family members came out and criticized them. 'What are you doing out here? Aren't you black?' Walker said. 'Of course, we're all hurting. The nation is hurting.'" I can see how that would be an interesting confrontation, especially for our citizen soldiers. You go back home, sitting around the table with the family, and say, "I was there at the protest, and I saw you at the protest too, and you were on the wrong side." That could be tough to deal with. In a follow-up email to Politico, he stressed, that is General Walker here, stressed that during the unrest, the Guard's priority is to protect citizens' rights to peaceful protest. It's a good approach to things. "Providing that assistance and security to the people of Washington, D.C. is an honor for every D.C. National Guard member and not a tool for theatrics," he said. But not all encounters were negative. Major Brent Mangum, who has been in the Utah National Guard for 17 years, said that during his week in D.C., a colleague who was wearing a wristband in memory of a fallen police friend had a warm encounter with a protester. Oh, that's nice. So two people had this encounter. That's good. It's good. Better than zero. The protester asked him about the wristband and why he wore it. So he took it off and handed it to her, allowing the woman to read it. "Oh, so you're hurting too?" she asked, Mangum recalled. Next section here is a change in attitude. One of the D.C. National Guardsmen said he was worried that a lot of the goodwill that the Guard has built up with local Washingtonians because of the coronavirus response and annual 4th of July celebrations was in jeopardy. Within the span of 30 to 40 minutes, all of that washed away because of political stuff, he said. Osterholm said the Guardsmen were ill-prepared for the hate directed at them by the protesters, which was reminiscent of the anti-military sentiment during the Vietnam War. Oh, I don't know about that. The shift from being viewed as heroes during the coronavirus pandemic to villains suppressing citizens' rights to protest happened overnight. And I can understand that, certainly. I don't know if I would necessarily compare it to the Vietnam War, but this generation doesn't know what that feels like. This generation knows thank you for your service. This generation knows that they can go to Lowe's and Home Depot and they can get 10% off. That, I believe, Osterholm said. A lot of us are still in denial of the intensity and the traumatic impact this has had for everyone. Well, turn around. Point your guns in the right direction. You'll be heroes again. Isaiah Lynch said that as an African American, he was called a traitor by some protesters who cursed at him and also seen as an oppressor protecting the cops. But he said a moment he would remember was when a man who had hit him with a brick the first day approached him a few days later to apologize. He shook my hand. Ooh, dangerous. The brick, too, but I mean, shaking a hand in the middle of a pandemic. He shook my hand and told me, "Hey, I'm sorry. Do you guys need any water or anything?" Okay, hit you with a brick. You need any water? Now, but on the other hand, I'll point out that as dangerous as that can be, and I'm certain people can be injured with it even with all the protections that they've got, you should point out that, it's not safe to throw things at the police or the National Guardsmen, but they are wearing helmets, and they've got shields and in many cases goggles on, and so, all sorts of padding that protects them from various attacks. And, we give them every advantage that we can and every protection that we can. But it seems the more equipped they are, the more paranoid they are about being attacked, and they very often respond inappropriately and disproportionately, especially given the amount of protection that they've got. It comes up a lot in the gun issue when cops are so quick to go to the gun and to shoot all sorts of uses of their guns, shooting suspects, shooting dogs. I see all the time, and but confronting an armed suspect and or a suspect who they think might be armed and very often isn't armed, and approaching them with guns drawn, but like crouching and behind cover and everything. But they've got the Kevlar vests on, and sometimes they've sent the SWAT units, and they're as protected as you could possibly be from an armed suspect. But yet they approach it as though, it was a wartime activity. No one wants to be shot, obviously, but I mean, sometimes you've got to wonder, what's the point of giving them all this protection if every time they confront an armed suspect, they bring in, they corner them and bring in SWAT teams and take them out with snipers and robots? I don't know. You'd think that would lead to like less paranoia and fear, but apparently it doesn't. And I guess I can sort of understand why. But if that's the case, then why keep loading them up with this equipment? It's only making things worse. Well, that's under some examination in some of the bills that are being introduced. And even in some of the suggested replacements for the various slogans out there, to adopt the approach that people like Radley Balco have been taking for so long, and that Armando became convinced of in his experience in Charlotte for the 2012 convention, once he saw all the way the cops were outfitted there, demilitarizing the police as opposed to defunding. But again, defunding could just as easily be referring to, well, take away the funds that they use to buy themselves military surplus equipment, or sometimes they don't even have to buy it. It's just granted to them by the federal government. But you think about the number of small-ish towns that really, for almost no reason, have SWAT teams that have not only Kevlar helmets and vests and AR-15s, but drive the mine-resistant vehicles. When was the last time that anybody, drug kingpin, bank robber, even international terrorist, mined the roads, to their secret volcano hideout lair or whatever? When have they needed a mine-resistant vehicle for anything? Anyway, let's continue on with this story. After hitting the guy with the brick, he said, "Do you need any water or anything?" Which I think is an indication that the Kevlar worked. As opposed to, "Do you need a bandage or medical attention?" No, I'm fine. The brick bounced off of my Kevlar helmet or my shield, and water will be fine. Next section here, stopping the bleeding, which I guess isn't from the brick, so that's good news. As of Monday, 42,700 National Guardsmen were deployed across 34 states and D.C. to deal with protests. At the height of the response last week, 1,200 D.C. National Guardsmen and another 3,900 from 11 states were patrolling the nation's capital. Defense Secretary Mark Esper gave the order for the out-of-state Guardsmen to begin leaving on Friday. All are expected to return home by Wednesday. And I guess, is that today, Wednesday, or next Wednesday? Let's see. I gave the order to begin leaving Friday, and I can't tell from that. What is the date on this piece? Will that unravel at 6/9? So that's yesterday. So they'll begin leaving Friday when we're not having a show. See, they're going to sneak out while we're off the air, and then they'll be all home by next Wednesday, I guess is the schedule. Guardsmen across the country have tried to signal to Americans in the streets that they're on their side in several ways, including some taking a knee, giving water to protesters, giving fist or elbow bumps, and even dancing the Macarena in Georgia in a video that went viral. By the way, how long ago was the Macarena? You can't dance something newer. I mean, I don't know any of the new dances, but I know them from seeing videos. So I've seen a lot of dancing going on among the protesters. But I guess, I don't know, maybe some of the more intricate and subtle dancing isn't an option available to you if you're in 70 pounds of field gear or whatever. So the Macarena will have to do. But while they've worked with local police, a number of them expressed disdain for how the police have conducted themselves. The police had lost credibility and a considerable amount of ground within their city, so we were a last-ditch attempt to try to stop the bleeding, said Captain Maggie Gregg of the Minnesota National Guard. She commanded a group of about 75 cooks, mechanics, medics, and even some HR professionals to provide security in South Minneapolis after what they'll call riots had broken out a few days earlier after Floyd's death. Captain Richard Gilberti, a Nevada guardsman, said at first he was nervous and unsure about how Reno residents would react to armed soldiers in uniforms on American streets. He worried about whether some people were going to be hostile to him and his fellow soldiers, but pretty quickly he could tell that most people were happy they were there after the city had been hit with looting and vandalism. Got to stop all the white kids, I guess. And of course, you're always nervous anytime someone can be shot in Reno, right? You never know when somebody's just going to do that for the hell of it. We're here to make sure everybody can exercise their constitutional rights safely, he said, adding that soldiers were reminded that these are all U.S. citizens, all Nevadans, just like us, so treat them accordingly. Other guardsmen who were activated during the protests and unrest said they felt they were being weaponized against fellow Americans. Well, then don't shoot. The message that was being conveyed to the public was that we were placed to be another weapon. We were placed there for scare. We were the scarecrow, said Gregg, who noted that some soldiers responding to the Minneapolis protests were assigned to ride along in ambulances largely for shock value, which evoked mixed feelings. Ride along in ambulances for shock value. That's weird. What's the shock value of that? Because many guardsmen are young, their friends were out there protesting. But they were here, and they were being made to feel like they were part of the problem instead of being part of the solution, Gregg said. She said that the National Guard's presence in the community may have even caused more unrest the first night they were deployed. Some local Minneapolis residents, she said, were more upset before they realized that the Guard had been called up to help protect the community instead of crack down on the protesters. It was hard for people to wrap their heads around the idea. How are you helping us if you have weapons and ammunition? Gregg said. And that's an interesting question and interesting perspective that they were sure that they were there to protect the community, which is, even that term, like, what do we mean by that? Are you there to protect property in the community? I don't know if that's necessarily as welcome. I mean, it's a helpful thing, certainly, where local businesses are owned by people who might be out protesting, but nonetheless don't want their businesses damaged. But it certainly wasn't made clear, and I don't know if they would have been allowed to make it clear. The problem is that there is a pretty significant divide between what the guardsmen thought they were doing and what the president thought he had dispatched them for. The president was dispatching them as a show of strength on his part. He feels that he's in command of the National Guard's forces, and if he sicks them on the protesters, they'll obey those orders and do it. And maybe that's an interesting thing. I mean, he should be reading this, except he can't read and he would never understand it. But, I guess I'm grateful for his misunderstanding of that divide because he's probably, once we get to our final downfall bunker scene and he thinks he's ordering troops in to slaughter protesters before they get to him. And then it turns out none of them believe that they're there on his behalf, but rather to protect the community, and then they all mass revolt against him. Well, that would be terrific. But at least if they don't show up for the work that Trump thinks they're there for, that would be helpful too. But it's hard not to see them as having been there to supplement the work of the police, since that's those are the nature of the orders issued to them by the president. So, I don't know. Very interesting. Maybe we can supplement that with more stories that we've been holding on to that are about the same thing, essentially, about the manner of the dispatching of military assets There's so many other amazing stories going on here, but these are some things that I've been holding on to for the past couple of days. Let's see. For instance, this extraordinary bit of news that I guess didn't come to pass, but that we certainly heard about it in passing on the show, too. This a CBS News piece by David Martin. That's the byline here. What the date? We have just the last updated earlier in the week on the 7th, which I think was Sunday. But it is, I think, from the end of last week. There we are, June 6th. So the revelation was Trump demanded, and I guess didn't get, 10,000 active duty troops deploy to the streets in heated Oval Office meeting. He wanted 10,000 regular standing armed forces troops out there, not necessarily the National Guard. I don't know whether he settled for the National Guard or he wanted them over and above the National Guard, but I guess didn't go the way he wanted. This is another one of those situations where the White House staff and the secretaries of the cabinet are working hard to delay implementing his foolish, short-tempered orders, hoping that he'll cool off or forget about things, or if there's enough bureaucratic pushback and enough red tape, things take so long that he forgets about the whole thing. But a lot of flip-flopping in Esper's position over the last week, the previous week, with the president pushing to deploy troops and Esper sending them home, and then Trump finding out that Esper was sending them home and making him reverse himself, and now eventually they're going to go home again anyway. But some real weird power struggles going on here. Let's see what they have to say in the article. In a heated and contentious debate in the Oval Office last Monday morning, President Trump demanded the military put 10,000 active duty troops into the streets immediately. A senior administration official told CBS News. Attorney General William Barr, Defense Secretary Mark Esper, and Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley objected to the demand. The official said, "You're crazy. You can't do that. You're an idiot. The presidents don't do that." And Trump's vision of the presidency, he always paid no attention to anything. So on the evening news, the president ordered something and it happened. So he just figures it always happens that way. In an attempt to satisfy Mr. Trump's demand, Esper and Milley used a call with the nation's governors later that morning. Remember this one? From the bunker. "You're all cowards. I'm very strong in my bunker." That's the call. So they used the call with the nation's governors later that morning to implore them all to call up the National Guard in their own states, the officials said. "If these governors didn't call up the Guard, we'd have active duty troops all over the country," this official said. So what an interesting tightrope it was that they, the way, I guess, that they chose to walk the tightrope. The president demands 10,000 troops on the streets. They say that's crazy. It can't be done. It's political suicide. It's constitutional suicide. It's every kind of suicide. And we won't, we're just not going to execute it that way. But instead they use this opportunity to say, well, if you don't why don't we call on the governors to put the National Guard there? That's less alarming than us putting the federal troops there. Maybe because the troops might see themselves as peacekeepers. They might see themselves as locals. They're less likely to, lose their minds and engage with local protesters in a military fashion than regular troops might be. They might have thought that was a great idea, and they could blackmail the governors into doing this. But with the threat, interesting, they backed themselves up with the threat of doing what they had just told the president really couldn't be done. So they knew it really couldn't be done, but they were hoping the governors would at least not be sure. And I mean, I could see myself sitting in the governor's mansion as governor or as an advisor to a governor saying, it can't be done, but then this is Trump, and he has this way of ordering things to be done even when everybody says they can't be done. And then people either just give up and do it, or they find some other way to do something just like it so that they can pretend it's being done. But either way, something that shouldn't happen happens. So I can sit here and tell you that legally this can't happen, but then again, troops might show up. And wouldn't you rather that they not? Maybe it is best to just mobilize the National Guard and put them there as a way of getting Trump to leave us alone. I mean, that's remarkable. Anyway, and so we're remarking on it. What's the problem? Anyway, that same day, the Pentagon started bringing 1,600 active duty troops to bases just outside of the District of Columbia. There was some call-up of active troops, right? Late that afternoon, Esper and Milley were on their way to the FBI's Washington field office, where the command center for the military and law enforcement response to the protests was located. The official said, en route, they received a call to come to the White House and give the president an update. I want to know what's going on. All right, well, we'll tell you in a minute. These guys are going to the command office to actually take control of this thing. Well, screw actual control. I want a briefing. It makes me look like I'm important. So there you go. Well, they turned around and went back. But guess what happened? They didn't brief the president. It was all a ploy. Isn't this interesting? They were instead asked to stay. Well, it doesn't say instead. He's pretending he doesn't know what's going on here. But we know better. They did not brief the president, but they were asked to stay for his address in the Rose Garden and then to accompany him on the walk across Lafayette Park to St. John's Church. So this is explaining how their presence for that staged scene. This is very interesting. So they're on their way to the Washington field office, the FBI Washington field office where the command center was. And they get called to the White House. Why? We're busy. What do you need us for? Well, you got to brief the president. Oh, we got to go brief the president. That's important. Let's go. Then no opportunity for him to actually brief the president. It wasn't a matter of Trump demanding a briefing. It was a matter of, Trump staffers trying to come up with a way to lure these guys into being props in the photo op without tipping their hand. Well, we want you to come back for a photo op. No. Well, then we're not going. Well, we want you to brief the president. Oh, I live for that. Let's go. Now, that's interesting. That's a very different perspective on things. So, as it turns out, it was all a hoax. They weren't there to brief the president. They were there to listen to his stupid speech that was full of word salad in the Rose Garden and then walk across with him. And how fantastic, because Milley, as it says here, had been wearing his dress uniform earlier in the morning, but had changed to his combat fatigues because he knew it was going to be a long night at the FBI command center. And when he showed up in fatigues, so much the better, right? Neither man realized the purpose of this walk was to stage a photo op in front of the church. But then we found out, I think from the Washington Post and others, that, they actually knew by that point. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. You're on Netroots Radio. We'll continue on with this CBS News report, an important one, and taken in context with a lot of good reporting done around the same time, earlier and afterward. It's becoming increasingly clear just how tenuous the president's hold on things really is. Although I think a lot of this is also story planting on behalf of Mark Esper and maybe General Milley, too, trying to come out of this with some distance between them and the president so they're not tarred with the same brush, so to speak. I'm not really certain, like here it says, neither man realized the purpose of his walk. This walk was to stage a photo op in front of their church. But I think that in one of the reporting outlets, they, I guess, got Esper on tape on the way over, commenting to whoever he was walking with, that by the time they were in the middle of the walk, they knew exactly what they were doing, and they were explicit about it. But maybe at the time they were being called in for the fake briefing, they didn't know. But did you catch that? The reason that Milley was there in fatigues was allegedly, and this too may have been planted by Milley, like, for all I know, I guess without any explanation, I might have imagined, yeah, well, what is he even doing there at the White House in fatigues as opposed to his dress uniform? Ordinarily, I would think that it's pretty much required that you show in the dress uniform. Although I've seen, there was the coronavirus briefing, and then the people who were military, but also public health figures were at least once or twice showed up in fatigues. But I would have believed if you had told me that the reporting was that Trump said, well, when we get to the action part and we're actually gassing people and storming our way over to the church, I want you in fatigue so it looks like you're a battle commander. But his explanation for it is, I was in dress uniform, but I got into the fatigues because I thought I was going to be at the command post all night. But then I got called in to brief the president, and I believed that. And, the president probably would get off on me briefing him in camo fatigues, so I'll just keep him on. But then it was great for the photo op. Anyway, on Face the Nation on Sunday, I guess last Sunday, Barr disputed the characterization of the Oval Office meeting, calling it completely false and denying the president demanded active duty troops in the streets immediately rather than having them on standby. The president never asked or suggested that we needed to deploy regular troops at that point, he said. And I don't know whether that was the same interview, but apparently over the weekend as well, he said, oh, no, we did stick him in the bunker because he was in danger. It wasn't an inspection, so who knows what to believe. The White House also disputed that Mr. Trump wanted to deploy the 10,000 active duty troops. This is false, in capital letters, false, tweeted Alyssa Farah, the White House Director of Strategic Communications. I was in the meeting. Donald Trump, using the Twitter handle there, real Donald Trump, very clearly directed DOD to surge the National Guard, not active duty, after nights of vandalism and arson in D.C., which wasn't really characterizing what was going on in D.C. at all. It worked, and we've seen powerful, peaceful demonstrations since. All right, so garbage from them. On Wednesday morning, after 2 nights of peaceful protests, Esper ordered 700 troops from the 82nd Airborne Division to return to Fort Bragg, and then delivered a statement in the Pentagon briefing room that he was opposed to using the Insurrection Act to send active duty troops into the streets. Esper was saying in public exactly what he had been saying, allegedly, in private to the president, but Mr. Trump was furious with him at a White House meeting later that morning, the official said. After the meeting, Esper reversed his decision to send the 700 troops home, not because of the president's anger, oh no, but because he had received reports that protesters were planning a 1 million-man march on Washington for Saturday, which, whatever. Sure, why not? As they've been backfill justifying policy on this thing since the beginning, and I guess that's of a piece with the latest craze among the police departments to share photos of things that they believe things they believed were weapons that they've seized on the streets or from protesters, and this is sort of evidence of malicious and militant malicious intent. And of course, they've mistaken them all along. I've seen a candle that was tweeted, a picture of a candle, a smashed candle that was tweeted as a improvised explosive device. I assume they mistook the wick for a fuse of some kind. I've seen the hot one now is what's interesting is they keep coming across construction sites and saying there's a pallet of bricks here deployed by the Antifa super soldiers. No, you're on a construction site, sir. There's bricks here because that's what we build things out of. Well, but here's concrete. You remember the cement milkshakes from some other previous protest? They're throwing cement milkshakes at us. So they're throwing cement at you? You mean? Yeah, that would be dangerous. I don't understand the milkshake part. Well, maybe now we have an understanding of what this is. They this time they were tweeting around pictures of cement, concrete in cups, coffee cups, and what looked like the short cups you might find ice cream in a dish, served in the to-go cup rather than a cone. And what's cement doing there? And their excuse was, well, you see, the Antifa super soldiers are disguising cement things that are hard that they can throw at us, as ice cream, as innocuous, cups of ice cream. I guess we're supposed to think that they were like sneaking weapons in under the guise of eating ice cream somehow. Like, why would that? I don't know. Like there's some international rule of war against arresting or tear gassing people who are eating ice cream. No, you can't ruin frozen desserts. That's against international law. I'm not certain what they thought we were going to believe about that. But as it turns out, people who actually knew what the hell was going on were saying, oh, that's actually what you do when you're mixing concrete, to test to see whether or not you've got, I guess, the right consistency that they recommend. And there's someone tweeted around this sheet of instructions, I guess, that comes with the concrete or the cement that you use to mix the concrete, that you would take non-styrofoam coffee cups and then cut them down a little bit and then pour concrete of the different consistencies in and see how it sets. Is it setting correctly? And if so, then fine, you're ready to go on your construction project. And the cops found that and imagined the rest. Oh, this must be those cement milkshakes they were talking about last time. But they know we're onto them with the milkshakes, so they've downsized them to Dixie cups of ice cream, which, as we all know, will land us all in The Hague if we do something about that. So we were powerless to stop the geniuses of the Antifa super soldiers. Well, anyway, so where were we? We were with Esper reversing his decision to send the troops home because he had heard there's a 1 million man march coming, and I guess it didn't come, and even if it did, why would you need members of the 82nd Airborne there for that? After another night of no violence in the streets, Esper again gave the order to send the 700 paratroopers back to Fort Bragg, and on Friday gave another order to withdraw all but 350 of the troops who had been placed on alert. Oh, and this was an interesting closing paragraph. The remaining 350 are members of the Old Guard, permanently based at Fort Myer, Virginia, just across the Potomac River from the district, and they were placed on a lower state of alert. That probably, I don't know whether that rings a bell for you, but maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just living here in the area or having seen mentions of the Old Guard before. The Old Guard, I mean, they're real troops. They train and everything just like everybody else, and they can absolutely be used in combat, and in the past they have been. But just to give you some context, the Old Guard, those are the guys, like if you saw the speeches of that the president gave, like at Fort McHenry recently, and you noticed that there were, you might not even have known that they were actual, armed forces, active duty troops, but you see ranks formed by people in colonial garb, right? In a fife and drum corps band, and you see them sometimes 4th of July, or at various presidential functions, again, dressed in colonial garb and doing the whole thing. That's the Old Guard. That's the chief ceremonial function of the Old Guard. And like I said, though they're trained fully, of course, and they're drawn from the ranks of fully trained soldiers. They're not fake soldiers by any means, but the assignment to the Old Guard is chiefly about ceremonial escort type. Well, when you're talking about Donald Trump, you want to be clear about when you say escort services for the president. Not that kind, not the kind that he and Ivanka have patents on in China, but, the 21-gun salute things and the swords in the air and, state dinners. Somebody's visiting from a foreign dignitary and they put on a display of, whatever, precision maneuvers. That's the Old Guard, or dressing up in colonial garb. It's interesting that's who ended up, remaining in D.C. to help deal with the protests. But in addition to doing all of that ceremonial escorting of the president, they do, at the heart of it is the idea that yes, there is an army base maintained just across the Potomac River at Fort Myer, Virginia, for the purposes of, in emergencies anyway, sort of archaically speaking, providing emergency security for the president. And they train for that in modern ways as well, not just in colonial garb. Anyway, let's see. We'll add to this. This all, of course, comes in the context of what we learned in the middle of last week, when people were circulating the memos from General Milley to the armed forces in general, as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. That memo that got sent around, right? Every member of the U.S. military swears an oath to support and defend the Constitution and the values embedded within it. All of that, and just remember your role in all of this. That was kind of an extraordinary moment. Now he's explaining himself to the newspapers and to CBS News about what he was doing that day. It is kind of extraordinary context. There's also a piece in the New York Times that I'm sure we won't have time to read because you know how long these things can go on, but an interesting one. Trump and the military, a mutual embrace might dissolve on America's streets. The subheader, maybe all we end up reading from this. There is a thin line between the military's tolerance for questionable partisan moves over the past 3 years and the point where these become intolerable, a retired general said. Actually, that didn't make all that much sense. So maybe read a few lead paragraphs here. David Sanger and Helene Cooper put this one together. For the first 3 years of President Trump's time in office, his blunt force view of the military was confined to threatening American adversaries. Fire and fury if North Korea challenged American troops. And then, of course, he saluted the North Korean general, but whatever. A warning that he would shoot down and destroy Iranian forces in the Persian Gulf. Billions spent to rejuvenate a nuclear arsenal he viewed as the ultimate source of American power. His generals and admirals accepted a commander-in-chief with what they diplomatically dismissed as a unique style. Give me tanks in the streets for July 4th, etc. And they welcomed the increase in military spending. His chief diplomats, while embarrassed, saw some utility in trying to force adversaries to the table. Now that tolerance has frayed. Mr. Trump's threat to use the 1807 Insurrection Act to send active-duty troops on American soil against protesters has laid bare the chasm in the national security community that was forming even when he ran for office in 2016. Back then, it was only a limited group of never-Trumpers. Establishment Republican national security professionals repelled by Mr. Trump's description of how American power should be wielded around the world, who wrote and spoke of the dangers. He lacks the character, values, and experience to be president, they wrote, and would put the country at risk, or put at risk our country's national security. This week, it was his former defense secretary, we didn't get to talk enough about this, a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and a range of other retired senior officers who were saying in public what they previously said only in private, that the risk lies in the fact that the president regards the military, which historically has prized its nonpartisan apolitical role in society, as just another political force to be masked to his advantage. Then there's the, this time attributed quote that didn't make a great deal of sense. It came from Douglas Lute, retired 3-star Army general who coordinated Afghanistan and Pakistan operations on the National Security Council for Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, and later became the American ambassador to NATO. That was the thin line story, right? He then goes on to say, relatively minor episodes have accumulated imperceptibly, but we are now at a point where real damage is being done. Trump's walk to a church near the White House on Monday with Defense Secretary Esper and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in tow may have been the moment everything shifted, Mr. Lute said. As that team walked across Lafayette Park with the president after the heavy-handed clearing of peaceful demonstrations, he said they crossed that line. By Thursday afternoon, there was only an uneasy truce as Mr. Trump agreed to begin sending home from the Washington region some of the 1,600 active-duty troops ordered from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and Fort Drum, New York, to quell protests that defense officials never wanted here in the first place. But both sides expected the turmoil that began with nationwide demonstrations after the killing of an unarmed black man, George Floyd, in police custody to continue. One general officer, speaking on condition of anonymity to avoid punishment from his superiors, said on Thursday that he was hoping to make it through another day without having to cite his constitutional obligations to decline an illegal order. He said he would not be surprised if he faced such a dilemma in the coming weeks. Former top officers were able to speak more freely, and that's good. And let's see, how much more of this is? It's quite a bit more, I guess. But at some point I want to stop this, and maybe this will be the point, and head on to other issues. I mean, speaking of the 10,000 troops issue, for instance, that he wanted on the streets, I don't know if there's any real connection to it other than the fact that the number is similar, but we probably ought to talk at some point about the fact that in the middle of all of this, Trump had a phone call with Putin again. And I guess I didn't put any stories about this into Pocket, which is kind of surprising. But I noticed the other day, I guess I didn't take note of it until I saw Liz Cheney, of all people, complaining about this. I hadn't caught wind of the policy, but Trump is withdrawing apparently something on the order of 1/3 of America's troops currently deployed in Germany, which is an interesting, you know how he's always butting heads with Angela Merkel and always at odds over NATO issues and, you know, constantly saying, well, if they don't pay enough money, then we shouldn't defend them. And so far nothing has come of it because people are, you know, working around trying to accommodate him and trying to make, you know, put off his orders. But apparently this is coming down, and it is around the same number. It wasn't like he was taking them out of Germany and putting them on the streets in Washington. But I think more to the point is another like undocumented call with Putin, followed by this ludicrous show of force in the American streets that just further inflames the situation, and a withdrawal of troops ostensibly stationed in Germany as a deterrent to, you know, the historical patterns of well, I don't know. Is it fair to say Russian aggression? I don't know. Lately, maybe it hasn't been, but certainly old Soviet-style aggression. And maybe you could argue that this is outmoded and outdated. But anyway, I did see Liz Cheney objecting to this, saying this was a terrible idea, and hoping to persuade Trump to change his mind. And apparently now lots and lots of senior Republicans on Capitol Hill and elsewhere in the national security apparatus hoping he'll change his mind. But what an odd thing that Putin should call and then get something that would be an amazing gift to Putin and also a huge threat possibly to our national security stance. Well, that's where we are. It's reported on here. Let's see. Up top, I see from Politico, Washington Post, 2 Washington Post pieces, including one that has the very interesting looking title, Trump chooses a senseless withdrawal from Germany. He threatens national security. It's an opinion piece. It's an editorial board piece, as a matter of fact. Why not let them chime in on some of this? In a transparent attempt to boost his sagging political fortunes. How so? President Trump proposed to stage a summit meeting of, oh yes, we almost forgot about this, of the G7. We did talk a little bit about this in Washington this month with Vladimir Putin among the special guests. We did mention that. In a May 30th phone call that reportedly turned testy, German Chancellor Angela Merkel demurred, citing the continuing threat of the COVID-19 pandemic as well as the lack of preparation for such a meeting. You can't just call it when you want it. You know, for Trump, he's like, well, why don't we have a steak dinner at the BLT Steakhouse with me, and we'll all work out the world problems. We'll make a great deal. You know, he thinks everything can be done casually. The rest of the world, not so much. Anyway, 1 week later, Trump's riposte to Ms. Merkel surfaced, I guess, a vindictive and, for U.S. national security, deeply damaging decision. I guess their view of it is this was in retaliation for her rejection, to withdraw nearly a third of American troops stationed in Germany. The move was made without consultation with the Germans, who, you know, in years past might have been thrilled about this, possibly. But anyway, no consultation with them or other NATO allies or even senior U.S. military officers in Europe who were taken by surprise when the story emerged on Friday. I'll just tweet it, right? The pullout, which Mr. Trump arrived at in the absence of any National Security Council deliberation, could substantially weaken U.S. ability to deter Russian aggression in Europe or respond to other foreign crises. However, shortly after speaking with Ms. Merkel, Mr. Trump initiated a phone call with Mr. Putin, who will be thrilled by the president's unilateral disarmament and exacerbation of a rift with a key ally. Although I will say it's not entirely clear in the way it used to be when the Warsaw Bloc was intact, and if you withdrew troops from what was then West Germany, well, they faced a communist bloc, East Germany, immediately to their east. It was easy to see what the threat was. Not quite so much now. Removing troops from Germany still leaves a pretty significant gap between where Russian troops might be deployed and where American troops were in Germany anyway. I mean, it's still, buffer states in between, of course, and, lots of deployed NATO troops even forward of that. So it's not entirely clear to me what they were doing. Like, I don't know, maybe there's no I don't know where American troops are deployed these days in Central and Eastern Europe. But I mean, there's a good bit of territory between where Russians might be stationed. I mean, at a minimum, Poland stands in the way, right? Poland, now Czechia as well. But best they can do is, I guess, if they rolled out of like Kaliningrad, the little enclave there in between Lithuania and Poland, they would have to cross the bulk of Poland to get to Germany. And I don't know. I don't know if that's seriously what we're worried about these days. But I guess at least there's the symbolic value of having the troops stationed there. They've been there a long time in Germany, and apparently bothered enough people that it became an issue. All right, let's see. Where do we leave off here? Oh, yeah, right. Well, we hadn't opened up all of these stories. Where did the story go that we had here? There we are. The withdrawal here. The pullout, which Mr. Trump arrived at, right, at the absence of any input and without consultation. Surely they also note would thrill Putin. Trump appears to believe he's punishing Merkel by removing forces that nominally defend Germany. The sycophant whom the president installed as ambassador to Germany, this is also key, I think, to the situation, Richard Grenell, has been arguing publicly that Germany doesn't merit U.S. bases when it fails to meet NATO defense spending guidelines. What he and the president fail to understand is that the 34,500 U.S. personnel in Germany, down from 235,000 during the Cold War, primarily bolster U.S. defense. The Ramstein Air Base is vital to operations in the Middle East and Africa, and the Landstuhl Regional Medical Center provides critical care to wounded American soldiers medevac from Iraq and Afghanistan. Interesting and a good reminder of what the troops are actually doing there in Germany. Mr. Trump has been impervious to serial attempts over the past 3 years by his national security advisors and senior military commanders to explain such basics to him. Instead, conceiving U.S. troops as mercenary forces who should be deployed only when host countries offer compensation he regards as adequate, he also has been threatening to pull troops out of South Korea, which would delight another dictator, North Korea's Kim Jong-un, who I guess didn't die. Further, Mr. Trump is reportedly contemplating accelerating a withdrawal from the remaining U.S. forces in Afghanistan so that it can be carried out in advance of the November election, rather than sometime next year. Never mind that this would likely short-circuit nascent talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban and leave the latter in a position to restore a theocratic dictatorship, because who cares, right? If the past is any guide, there will now be a scramble within the Pentagon or by Trump-friendly congressional Republicans to reverse or water down the president's decision, which, as of late Monday, had still not been formally announced. So, I don't know. Sometimes you don't have to worry about these things. In the meantime, it should be clearer than ever why former senior military leaders such as Jim Mattis and Colin Powell have taken the lead in publicly repudiating the president. He is, as they have said, a liar who divides the country. He is also increasingly a threat to national security. Interesting, and also interesting for the editorial board to take the time to throw out the liar word with respect to the president. And so I guess I'm glad they eventually got around to that one too. All right, almost time to give up the mic for the day. We still have Thursday to fill you in on the rest of the stuff, but I guess I'll make one quick detour. I think it remains quick because it's coming from the San Diego Union Tribune, and I think it might be behind a paywall. No, this time it's not. Update of sorts on the sailors of the USS Theodore Roosevelt. Interesting news from out of there. CDC study of Roosevelt outbreak finds lower rates of COVID-19 among sailors who wore masks. What do you know? Another point scored for masking. COVID-19 study of nearly 400 sailors tracked movement, behavior to better understand the virus. Andrew Dyer reports for the San Diego Union Tribune. Preventative measures such as wearing face coverings, practicing social distancing to the extent possible on an aircraft carrier, and avoiding common areas effectively lowered the COVID-19 infection rate among sailors on the aircraft Theodore Roosevelt, a Navy and CDC study said. And I mean, effectively lowered it to half the crew. 1,000 people that got it. But okay. Military health officials in the CDC on April 20th began soliciting volunteers from the San Diego-based ship as it was sidelined in Guam, battling an outbreak of COVID-19 among the crew. The Navy said Tuesday that a total of 1,273 Roosevelt sailors eventually tested positive for the virus out of a crew of almost 5,000. One, Chief Aviation Ordnanceman Charles Thacker, 41, died of the disease. Initially, the Navy asked 1,400 sailors to participate in the study. 382 did. That was a surprise to us, as you recall. A Navy Bureau of Medicine and Surgery official said at the time that the demands of the crew to get back to sea might have affected participation rates. The goal of the study, they said, was to better understand the behavior of the virus and the people who had it. I guess the study paints a picture of current and prior infection among young adults living in close quarters. This data will contribute to understanding COVID-19 in the U.S. military as well as among young adults in other close communal environments, like, say, going off to college. Because participation in the study was voluntary and self-reporting, it's possible the results are affected by selection and recall biases, the author notes, and that's important to point out. All study participants provided blood samples, tested for antibodies, which indicate previous exposure to the virus, and 267 participants provided swab samples to test for the current presence of the virus. Basically, the upshot, though, all the things that we've been told to do to try and suppress the spread of the virus actually kind of work, even where you really can't practice a whole lot of social distancing. Another score for masks. And that's it for today. Time to hand things over to Justice. I can tell you I got my COVID-19 test yesterday in preparation for Friday's procedure. The president's right about that thing. It is rather uncomfortable having that swab stuck up into your brain, but don't fear it if you need to get one. I survived. You'll survive too. And now you'll survive by tuning in and staying tuned in for Justice Putnam as he brings you his update and views on the stories commanding attention at home and around the world. Let's see what I can't sneak in. Oh, and he made a nice short version of the summary.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How about here? The pandemic spikes anew. The chief health officer for Orange County, California, has resigned after receiving numerous credible death threats. And of course, as you might have guessed, states that rush to reopen against expert advice are reporting record high numbers of virus cases. Maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow and identify where it's breaking out. Stay tuned.